Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Port Charles had seen its share of tragedy, but grief had a way of returning like the tide, rolling in when least expected, flooding the streets of memory and forcing even the strongest to stand still. On a grey February morning, the wind coming off the harbour carried a sharp chill, rattling the windows of the Spencer house. Inside, silence pressed heavily against the walls. For Lulu Spencer, silence had become an enemy. She hadn't been there when her father died. That truth gnawed at her in ways she could barely articulate. Lulu stood in the attic, dust swirling in faint beams of light cutting through the small circular window. Boxes were stacked high, old campaign buttons from Laura's Merrill Run, children's drawings, faded newspaper clippings that once screamed headlines about adventures and scandals. And then she saw it. A photograph. It had slipped halfway out of a cracked leather album, as if it had been waiting for her. Her hands trembled as she pulled it free. Luke Spencer stood at the center of the frame, his grin cocky and unapologetic, one arm slung around a much younger Lulu who couldn't have been more than 5. She was sitting on his shoulders, laughing, her tiny fingers tangled in his hair. Her breath hitched. "I don't even remember this day," she whispered to the empty room. The photo blurred as tears filled her eyes, all those lost years, all those moments she'd never get back, while the world had mourned Luke Spencer, while Laura had grieved, while Port Charles had reeled, Lulu had been suspended in a hospital bed, trapped in darkness. She sank onto the floor, clutching the photograph to her chest. "I didn't get to say goodbye," she choked. The words echoed in the attic like a confession. Downstairs, Laura Spencer Collins felt it before she heard it, a mother always knows. She climbed the attic stairs slowly, each step measured, her own heart heavy with a grief that had never truly left her. She found Lulu sitting in the dust, shattered. "Oh, sweetheart." Lulu looked up, eyes red and brimming. "I wasn't there, Mom, I wasn't there when he. Laura knelt beside her, pulling her daughter into her arms. "You were always there for him," she said softly, "and he knew that." "But I don't know how to let him go," Lulu whispered. "It feels like he just disappeared." Laura closed her eyes briefly. Letting go of Luke Spencer had never been simple, it had never been clean. Their love had been explosive, messy, epic, it had defined decades. And even now, part of her still expected to hear his voice crackling through a doorway with some reckless scheme, and that half-crooked grin. "You don't let him go," Laura said finally, "you carry him with you." But Lulu wasn't sure that was enough. Across town at the Quartermain mansion, Tracy Quartermain stood at the living room bar, pouring herself a very generous splash of scotch. She had heard about Lulu's breakdowns, and while Tracy would never describe herself as sentimental, she had loved Luke in her own complicated, infuriating, deeply personal way. He had been a rogue, a scoundrel, a thief of hearts and occasionally actual jewels. And he had loved her fiercely in the only way Luke Spencer knew how. She took a sip and stared out the window. "Damn you, Luke," she muttered, still causing chaos from beyond the grave. But when she learned Lulu was struggling, really struggling, Tracy made a decision. If Lulu needed closure, then Tracy Quartermain would damn well deliver it. By afternoon, word began spreading quietly through Port Charles. There would be a remembrance. Not a stiff memorial, not a black tie affair. Something that felt like Luke. Something real. Tracy personally made the calls. First to Sonny Corinthos. Sonny stood in his penthouse, phone pressed to his ear, eyes dark with thought as Tracy's clipped voice delivered the news. "We're gathering tonight," she said, "for Luke." Sonny's jaw tightened. Luke had been more than a friend, more than a partner in chaos. He had felt like a brother. "I'll be there," Sonny said quietly. When he hung up, Carly Spencer was watching him. "Tracy," she asked. He nodded. Carly crossed the room slowly. "It's about Luke, isn't it?" Sonny exhaled heavily. "Yeah." Carly's expression softened. He would have hated a somber memorial. A faint smile tugged at Sonny's lips. He'd want stories, laughter, scotch. "And trouble," Carly added. Sonny looked out over the harbour. He always felt like family. Carly slipped her hand into his. "He is family." She thought of her mother, Bobby Spencer. The idea of Luke and Bobby together again somewhere beyond this world brought unexpected comfort. "I hope he found her," Carly murmured, "wherever he is." As dusk approached, the pier became the heart of Port Charles. Candles flickered in glass jars lining the wooden planks. Paper lanterns sat in neat rows, waiting to be lit and released into the night sky. Elizabeth Baldwin arrived quietly, her expression reflective. Luke had been part of the tapestry of her life for as long as she could remember, flawed, wild, but unforgettable. Laura stood near the railing, the wind tugging gently at her hair. When Lulu joined her, holding the old photograph, Laura squeezed her hand. Then Tracy appeared, commanding as ever, though her eyes betrayed something softer beneath. "I trust we're all sufficiently prepared to honor the most infuriating man in Port Charles history," Tracy declared. Sonny let out a low chuckle that about sums him up. They gathered in a loose circle as the sky deepened into navy blue. For a moment no one spoke. Then Tracy lifted her glass. "To Luke Spencer," she said firmly, "the man who drove me insane, broke my heart, and made life one hell of a ride." Glasses clinked. Sonny stepped forward next. He was reckless, he was stubborn, but if you were his friend, he'd go to war for you. Carly nodded, and he loved hard, even when he didn't know how to show it. Elizabeth smiled faintly. He had a way of believing in people when they didn't believe in themselves. Finally, all eyes turned to Lulu's. She swallowed hard, gripping the photograph. "I miss saying goodbye," she began, voice trembling, "but I've realized something today." She looked up at the sky. "My dad never did anything halfway, not love, not life, not being a father." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "I don't need a final conversation to know he loved me. I felt it every day." Laura stepped forward then, her own composure cracking. "I spent my life loving Luke," Laura said softly, "and losing him and finding him again." A tear slid down her face. "He's not here in the way we want, but he never really left me. Sometimes I swear I can feel him pushing me forward, making me stronger." Her voice broke. "And I am grateful for every wild, impossible moment we shared." Silence fell thick and sacred. Tracy nodded once. "Lanterns," she instructed. One by one, candles were lit. The harbor reflected golden light as the first lantern drifted upward. Lulu closed her eyes as hers rose into the sky. "Goodbye, Daddy," she whispered. And for the first time since she had woken from her coma, the ache inside her chest eased. The lanterns floated higher, scattering like stars. Port Charles watched and remembered. In Part 2. Later that evening, after the lanterns had vanished into the dark horizon, the group drifted toward the Haunted Stars dock, Luke's ship, his sanctuary, his legacy. The wind had calmed, leaving the harbor eerily still. Tracy stood at the gangplank, hesitating for just a second before stepping aboard. Inside, the ship smelled faintly of wood polish and sea air. It felt untouched. As if Luke might swagger out from below deck at any moment, complaining about the sentimental gathering. Lulu walked slowly through the cabin, fingertips brushing along familiar surfaces. "I used to think he was invincible," she said quietly. Sonny leaned against the doorway. He liked people thinking that. Laura smiled faintly. He was terrified half the time, he just didn't show it. They gathered around the small table inside. Tracy poured another round of drinks. "To invincibility," she muttered dryly. Laughter broke through the heaviness. Stories followed. Sonny recalled a night when Luke had talked him out of starting a war that would have destroyed half the city. Carly shared how Luke once told her, "Never apologize for surviving." Elizabeth remembered how Luke had defended her when she was young and lost, telling her she was stronger than she knew. Lulu listened, absorbing every word like precious oxygen. These weren't just stories. They were pieces of him. Finally, she stood. "I thought closure meant a final goodbye," she said softly, "but maybe it's this, sharing him, keeping him alive in the stories." Laura's eyes shone with pride. "That's exactly what it is." Lulu looked around at the people gathered: Tracy, who had loved Luke fiercely in her own sharp-edged way, Sonny, who had treated him like a brother, Carly, whose Spencer blood tied her to him forever, Elizabeth, who had grown up in his orbit. "He mattered," Lulu said. "He still does," Laura corrected gently. Outside, the moon shimmered across the water. For the first time, Lulu felt something shift inside her. Not the absence of pain, but acceptance. She stepped out onto the deck alone for a moment. The night air wrapped around her like a quiet embrace. "I'll carry you with me," she whispered into the darkness, "but I'm going to live fully the way you did." A soft breeze swept across the harbor. And in that fleeting second, Lulu could almost hear his voice, teasing, proud, urging her forward. She smiled through her tears. Back inside, Tracy glanced toward the door. "She's going to be fine," Tracy said gruffly. Laura nodded. "She's his daughter." They sat together for a while longer, letting silence replace sorrow. Grief, they realized, didn't vanish. It transformed. It became memory. It became strength. And in Port Charles, where legends were born and broken every day, Luke Spencer remained exactly what he had always been. Unforgettable. As the group finally stepped off the ship and onto the dock, the harbor lights flickered gently behind them. Above, the sky stretched wide and endless. And somewhere beyond it, perhaps, a rogue with a crooked grin raised a glass of his own. Port Charles had said goodbye. But Luke Spencer would live on, in every story told, every risk taken, every act of reckless love. The tide rolled in, and life moved forward.